Hello everyone, welcome to Chess with Mr. Tim. I am Mr. Tim, and today I am going to teach you about one of my favorite checkmates. It's called the ladder checkmate. The ladder checkmate is probably the most common checkmate that beginner and even intermediate students will use in their chess games. So this is one that I make sure that all of my students have memorized by the time they get through one of my sessions of chess, because this is how most of their games are going to end. So before I get through how the ladder checkmate works, I like to review check and checkmate and the 3 rules about setting up a checkmate. So if you're not familiar with those, let's go through them now. I actually have a few guest students in my class today helping me out, Maddie and Julie. So they're gonna help me answer some of these questions. So let's see, can somebody tell me in 7 words or less, because this is a really good way of remembering it in a simple way so that you can memorize it. 7 words or less, what does check mean? Yes.
When the king is in danger.
When the king is in danger. So that's it. That's all that check means. So let's see. When the king is in danger. There we go. Even 1 word to spare. Check means the king is in danger. That's it. It doesn't matter what's putting the king in danger. It doesn't matter how the king is in danger and where it has to go to get out of danger and whether it can go somewhere to get out of danger. Check just means the king is in danger. That's it. Now, who can tell me the 3 different kinds of ways to get out of check? Yes, go ahead.
CPR, capture, protect, run away.
That's right. CPR, capture, protect, run. Capture the piece that's putting the king in check. P for protect, as in put a piece in front of the king so that the king's not in danger anymore. And R for run. This is usually review once we get up to the ladder checkmate, but sometimes it's worth going through all the different ones. So this is an example of check, and then we might show a way that we can capture to get out of check, which might maybe look like this. Let's say there's a piece on your team that could capture to help the king get out of danger. Now that king's in danger, which is also important to go through. You can capture with your king to get out of danger as long as that gets you out of check. And then, of course, the second way to get out of check, sometimes if you can't capture, you look for a way to block, which might happen here. You can block check by putting a piece in between the king and the checking piece. And then if all else fails, the worst way to get out of check usually, and that's how I want everyone to remember it, because a lot of times students will default to moving the king when the king's in check, but that's usually not the best way to get out of check. And if you do that, you might miss a better move. Running away, the 3rd way out of check. If there's no way to get out of check by capturing or blocking, you look to see if you could move the king. And in this case, we can move the king. You have to make sure you're moving it out of check though. So we don't want to move it up or we don't want to move it down because those spots are still check. So instead, we can move it over here, we can move it over here. We have a few choices, but you have to get the king out of danger by the end of your turn. Which brings us to the next question. The next question is, what is checkmate? Who can tell me what checkmate is in, let's say, 10 words or less? Yes.
When the king is in danger and cannot get away.
When the king's in danger and can't get away. So when the king is in check, it has to get out of check, but sometimes it can't get out of check by capturing, protecting, or running, and that means the game is over. Remember, you don't win the game by taking the king, you win the game by putting the king in check in a way that it can't get out of check. If it can get out of check, it's not checkmate. But if it's in check and it has no way out, like in this example, the queen's putting the king in check, the king can't capture the queen, there's nothing else on the team that can capture the queen, the king can't block the queen, and the king can't run away from the queen. Everywhere it tries to go is still check. So this is checkmate. Game over. You don't make a move in check and then capture the king. Remember, you're never allowed to capture the king in chess. So the game ends as soon as the king is in check and can't get out. So now that we went through a review of check and checkmate, let's go through the 3 facts about setting up a checkmate, and then we'll get into using those 3 facts to help us make a ladder checkmate. So the first fact about setting up a checkmate is you can't checkmate with one piece. It's impossible. It doesn't matter where the king is on the board. It doesn't matter what piece you're using. You can't put the king in checkmate with one piece. You can certainly put the king in check with one piece, and then the king gets out of check. And then you could put it again in check with the same piece, and then the king gets out of check. And then you put the king in check again with the same piece, and then it gets out of check. We're not making any progress, are we? Right? Because we only have one piece attacking the king. You have to have pieces working together. So any checkmate that you set up is going to use at least a couple of pieces helping each other. One of them might be putting the king in check. The other one might be guarding that piece, or it might be blocking the king from getting away from check. The second fact about setting up a checkmate is that it's a lot easier to checkmate the king on the edge of the board. When the king is in the middle of the board, how many move choices does it have? How many move choices does the king have each turn? Yes.
It has 8.
8 move choices. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. When it's off the edge of the board, it has 8 move choices. Now, in this case, we can't use all of those 8 move choices because that's check from the queen and from the king. That's check from the queen. 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 But we have a few places we can go. So it's not checkmate because we're not in check. And we also have a few ways that we can get out of check if something were to come and put us in check. But when the king's on the edge of the board, it doesn't have 8 choices. It only has 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, because there's no board left for it to go this way. If the king's in the corner, it's an even worse situation. The king only has 3 choices. 1, 2, 3. So when you're trying to checkmate the king, it is easier to checkmate on the edge. It's not impossible to checkmate off the edge, but it's a lot harder. So if we're trying to set up a checkmate, you want to go for the edge of the board. So the third fact about setting up a checkmate is if you are putting the king in check, you are probably not setting up a checkmate. And that's something that even some intermediate level students of mine forget sometimes. They think that they want to put the king in check because checkmate involves the king being in check. But if you put the king in check, you are probably not setting up a checkmate. Like, for example, if the king's on the edge of the board here, like this, is the best choice moving down over here and putting the king in check? No, not like that. We want to bring in some help, right? So we don't want to just go after the king with the one piece we have. We would want to come in and put it in check like this. Or let's say that we didn't even have this piece in a spot where it could be useful. Let's say the king's over here and the queen's over here like this. King's here, queen's there. The best move here is not to come down and put the king in check and chase the king off the edge of the board. The best move here would be to trap the king on the edge of the board. So those are the 3 facts about setting up a checkmate. Fact 1, you can't checkmate with just one piece. Fact 2, it's a lot easier to checkmate the king on the edge than it is in the middle or off the edge. Fact 3, if you're putting the king in check, you're probably not setting up for a checkmate. We're going to use all 3 of those facts to make a staircase checkmate. Now, the staircase checkmate is a checkmate that you can do with queens and rooks. You can do it with 1 rook, 1 queen. You can do it with 2 queens if you happen to get a pawn to the other side of the board while you still had your first queen and now you've got 2 queens. Or you can do this with 2 rooks. You just need pieces that can attack a whole row at once, up and down or side to side. You can't do this with pawns. You can't do it with knights. You can't do it with bishops. So the first step of setting up the ladder checkmate is deciding where you want to checkmate the king. Remember, we said that a checkmate on the edge of the board is easier than a checkmate off the edge of the board. That's the second fact about setting up a checkmate. So we have to pick which edge of the board we want to checkmate the king on. In this case, we pick the bottom because the king's only 2 spaces away from the bottom. If the king were over here, we'd pick the left side. If the king were over here, we'd pick the top. So the answer isn't the same every time. It depends on where the pieces are. So in this case, we pick the bottom of the board. Now, the first move we make, remember, if we're putting the king in check, we're not setting up a checkmate, probably not setting up a checkmate. So the first move we make is not check. The first move we make is a move that stops the king from moving away from the edge of the board. Because we can't get the king to the edge of the board by going here and saying, oh, please don't move away from the edge of the board. Please move to the edge to make it easier for me to checkmate you. The other player is going to move away from the edge and try and avoid a checkmate. So what we want to do instead is make a move like this. See, now we're making kind of like an invisible wall with the queen. Anywhere the king tries to go in that row would be check, so it can't move there. The king is trapped. Now, it doesn't have to move to the edge yet, but that's where bringing in some help comes in next turn. So we've got the king trapped here. It's the king's turn to move now. Let's say maybe the king goes over here like this. Now we bring in help. Remember I said it's impossible to checkmate with one piece? Well, that's where this fact comes into play. We've got the queen guarding this row, the third row. We need to bring the rook in to help. So remember, we're trying to get the king to the edge of the board. So what we're doing is we're eliminating the rows where the king's allowed to move one by one. First we got this row, now we're going to go after this row. And how do we do it? We bring the rook down here. So now we've got the queen guarding this row and the rook guarding this row. This step is called the guard and the hunter. You always have to have a guard stopping the king from moving away from the edge, and you always have to have a hunter that attacks the king in the row that it's in, forcing it closer to the edge of the board. And that's what we're doing here. The king can't go up because of the queen. It can't stay in its row because of the rook. It has to move down. So it can't move down straight there because then the queen's still putting it in check diagonally, so maybe it moves down over here like this. Now, the reason this is called the ladder checkmate is because just like two hands climbing up a ladder, they take turns moving and one goes a little further than the other one each time. It's the same with how we're moving the pieces. First we move the queen, then we move the rook a little bit more than the queen. Now we move the queen a little bit more than the rook. They take turns moving. So this piece, which used to be the guard, is now not doing anything. And this piece, which used to be the hunter, is now the guard. See, it's stopping the king from moving up. So we would move the queen down here. Now the king's in check and it can't move up. And it's on the edge of the board, so it can't move down anymore. This is checkmate. It's a really simple checkmate, but you have to know the steps to do it. So let's set it up again. Let's say this time the king's over here. Remember, I said that the way that you do it changes depending on where the other player's king is. So if the king's over here this time, which side of the board are we going to checkmate the king on? Top, bottom, left, or right? What do you think? Yes?
Left.
Left. It's only one space away from the left, so it's an easy answer. So what do? Do we come over and put the king in check and say, oh, please move closer to the edge. Please make it easier for me to checkmate you? No, we make it so they don't have a choice. We trap the king. What kind of a move can we make to trap the king? Yes?
C2.
C2. We move the rook over here because we are stopping the king from getting away from the edge. Now, the king doesn't have to move closer to the edge yet because we haven't brought in any help yet, but it can't move away from the edge, so we effectively trapped it. Now let's say the other player goes over here like this. Now, what do? Do we put the king in check with the rook and let the king escape toward the middle? No, the rook is the guard. Now we need to bring in the hunter, right? The queen gets to be the hunter. It attacks the whole row that the king is in. Check. The king can't move this way. It can't stay in this row. It has to move to the edge. Over there like that. Now, remember what they were doing. They were taking turns. So first we move the rook, then we move the queen, then we move the rook. The rook attacks the king in the row that it's in. Checkmate. Nice and easy. Now let's make the king a little closer to the edge of the board, the middle of the board, so that you can see how this could sometimes take a little bit longer. So let's put our king over here. Let's put their queen over here. So now, which edge should we go with? Well, the king is pretty close to this edge and this edge. So let's go with the top edge this time. We haven't done that one yet. The first thing we do is we have to trap the king so it can't get away from the top, right? How do we do that? We could use either piece, but let's say we move the queen. Now the king can't move down. Instead, it can stay in this row. So let's say it moves over here like this. Now we move our rook up, right? They take turns. First we move the queen, then we move the rook. Now the king goes over here like this. Now we move the queen, right? First we move the queen, then we move the rook. Now we move the queen. The rook's doing the job of the guard. The queen gets to be the hunter. Check. The king has to get out of check. Sometimes this can get a little tricky though. Watch this. What if the king moves over there? Well, now our next move was going to be this, but if we go there, we're going to lose our rook. So instead, what do? We move as far away from this king as we can, because the king can only move one space at a time. We move far away without making our rook blocked. We still want to get the rook to the 7th row, but we want to do it in a way that it'll be safe, so we move it all the way over there. So we had to make a little repositioning move, right? So now let's say the king moves over here like this. Now we just continue with the checkmate. The rook goes up here, and this time it can attack the 7th rank safely. Now the king has to get out of check. Where's it gonna go? Let's say it tries to keep going closer to the rook, but it's too late. We've got checkmate. And that is the ladder checkmate. First, you decide which edge of the board you're going to checkmate the king on. In this case, we picked the top. Then you trap the king so that it can't get any further from the edge than it already is. And then after that, you do the guard and the hunter step. They keep taking turns, moving a little closer to the edge until finally the king's on the edge in a way that it can't escape. And that is checkmate. Like I said, this is one of the most common checkmates that beginner and intermediate level students will do, and it's one that students who are learning chess should memorize because this is how most of them are going to win their games. All right, have fun playing, everyone.